welcome everyone, and did want to give people a chance to introduce themselves as always. So if you want to just check in the chat, and I know we're getting to know each other now 6 months in, but if you want to share your name, organization, where you're calling in from, and maybe any fun vacation plans you have. I also want to give a chance to my colleague to introduce herself. So I'm joined by two colleagues today, Jamie, who's from our comms team, who you've met before, and warm welcome to Jennifer, who has started with us yesterday in Jorge's role. Many of you know Jorge as manager of cities on the team. So Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Am I muted? Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer. I'm the new manager of cities, and I'm very glad to be joining this community today. And I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone.
Great, thanks. We're so happy to have you. Okay, so the agenda for today, we're passing it over now to Salt Spring Island, who's going to give a presentation, share a bit about their work and experience. And then we have a peer input process, which I'll speak more about when we get there. And we'll come back as a group for a goodbye. So without further ado, over to you, Darlene.
Hi, friends. How are you all? Nice to see you. My name's Darlene Gage. I am here in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Senchothan and Hulkaminam speaking peoples, colonially known as Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. Really happy to be here with all of you today, just share some what we think is super exciting stuff. We hope is going to be super exciting stuff for you. Lots of learning from our organization, Transition Salt Spring, going on the past few years as we launched a local climate action plan for Salt Spring Island. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to go through 3 stages with you today. First stage is going to be sharing with you a little bit about how we work as an organization. Brian and I sometimes go back and forth on this, but and Brian is my colleague, Brian Young, but it's also here, and Ruth Waldick is here joining me as well, and they'll be doing pieces of this little presentation with me. We go back and forth around, is it more important how we do things or what we do? And so I'm on the side of how we do things being equally important to what we do. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about how we do things within our organization to activate our climate action plan. And then I'm going to invite Ruth and Brian to join us to talk about what we all learned as an organization, trying to create our local climate action plan for a rural community. And then Brian's going to end by sharing with you some of the what we're doing, how we're implementing our climate action plan here on Salt Spring Island. And then how we're going to operate as well as have questions from you after each little section. So I'm going to do a piece, then open up for questions and etc. So you can ask about the how, you can ask about the what, and then you can ask about the implementation and how we did things. So recognizing that rural climate action plans are a little bit different than urban ones. In fact, we have a few things to share along those lines about how we think it's a little bit easier in some ways to do things in a rural community from a nonprofit perspective. We're not part of government. So this is, we're going to share a few little insights for you on that front as well. So jumping right in, Transition Salt Spring, our new mission statement when we started to launch from what we were previously to what we are now is this beautiful sentence, responding to climate change, restoring ecosystems, reimagining community together. Tried to capture a lot of different pieces in that, but definitely trying to communicate to folks that our main and only focus really is climate change. But we do that by restoring ecosystems and bringing the community together in different ways to try to get ready for the changes that are already here and are coming for us through using a collaborative approach. So we're part of the Transition Town movement, which I know most of you have probably heard of. Brian's going to pop a little piece in the chat there to give you a link to the Transition Town movement if you're not familiar with it. The ethos or the focus of the Transition Town movement is working for a low carbon, socially just future with resilient communities, more active participation in society, and caring culture focused on supporting each other. So each transition town body or organization looks different from the other. There's kind of an overarching set of values and sometimes approaches, but really each transition town organization is its own entity and operates individually. It's part of their subsidiarity ethos, and I'll go into that a little bit later. So we became the activators of the local Salt Spring Island Climate Action Plan during the process of trying to actually write the plan and then trying to decide who was going to implement it. So writing it was one thing, and we'll get into that when Ruth and Brian come on, but implementing it was a whole other piece, so that of course the report just didn't sit on the shelf. It was something that we could actually see being used as a guidepost and actively implemented over time. So that is really our focus. We do that by using a collective impact approach with TSS as the backbone organization. So I would say, though, that our journey into collective impact was somewhat sideways. I'm not sure that we necessarily knew that we were using a collective impact approach until we started to look at the Tamarack philosophy and theory around those elements, and it's been teaching us a lot about how to be a better backbone organization within our community. And of course, collaboration being at the core of everything that we do, really recognizing that this is a job that's too big for a small organization like ours. However, as an organization, we had to grow very, very quickly to be able to meet the needs of becoming activators of the plan and fill in those gaps. We have a very unique governance system here in the Gulf Islands. I won't go into trying to describe it, except to say that there are lots of gaps and things that fall into no one's jurisdiction. So we decided as a small nonprofit organization, and now a charity, that we were the group that needed to be able to step in and fill some of those gaps, to be able to ensure that the plan didn't just sit on the shelf. We did a lot of community consultation around that. We had community buy-in for that from many, many stakeholders, but puts us in a bit of a unique position in that way. So in a way, though, when we look back at that move to put the Climate Action Plan into a nonprofit, we think that it's actually in some ways better. We think we can take more risks. We think we can move faster and think bigger and act more creatively than government might want to or is able to. And I think in some ways we're also freer to make mistakes. We have a nonprofit board that gets elected by our members. We're not up for re-election every 4 years. So we can make mistakes, own those mistakes, pick ourselves up, try again. So we think that there's a nimbleness in our approach, in the approach of embedding this work in a nonprofit that's quite interesting. And also, because we're in a smaller community, it's possible to know all the players personally, which means that we can call them together and work with them in ways that perhaps in larger communities might be less possible. So part of how we do our work is trying to use this approach that says we're trying to model this new world that is needed now, that we need to move into, letting fall away some of the older ways of working that aren't really serving people. So at the heart of that is an attempt to try to create as non-hierarchical an organization as possible. And that's both internally and how we work in the community. We use a focus areas called subsidiarity and sociocracy. And again, Brian will put some pieces in the chat there for you to help you see a little bit more about how these governance systems work to try to create more equality within our organization. So that means a lot of that really just is focused on decentralizing decision-making from the top to the level at which it's being implemented. So if you're a working group who's working on, so for example, one of our working groups is about electric vehicles. They love electric vehicles. They could talk about electric vehicles till the cows come home. And they want to teach other people about it. And, you know, we have the highest per capita. Their favorite piece, and we love it too, is that we have the highest per capita uptake of electric vehicles in Canada, you know, per population. And that's in large part due to that group just doing what they needed to do under the banner of Transition Salt Spring. But basically, we leave them to do their own thing in whatever way that they would like. we're not trying to control them in most ways. There's a few little pieces that they need to agree to with us, but mostly they're off doing their own thing. So that's true with almost everything that we do, trying to download the decision making and the authority to the level at which it's being implemented. And part of our move towards non-hierarchy as well is embedded in our pay equity approach, where we pay everybody in the organization the same rate, the administrator, the bookkeepers, the executive director, everybody in between, in a recognition that everyone brings something that is key to the organization to the table. So that's a core part of living our ethos. Care and feeding of our relationships. I'm not at all pretending that we don't have arguments and that we don't come into conflict with each other, but we prioritize working those things out with each other, knowing that if our relationships are strong, our work is going to be strong. And if our relationships are weak or faltering, our work won't be as good. So we place that at the center of our and this also includes our values, putting our values at the core of our work. These values are actually taken from the Transition Town movement or network. Brian, again, will put some pieces in the chat to show you some of the larger description of those values, but I just thought I'd share with you today, because again, having values as a touchstone for how you work is just for us a really great way to keep us grounded, keep us reflecting and checking back in with ourselves to make sure that what we're doing is being done in a way that is connected to this new world that we want to help create. So we talk about the head, the heart, and the hands, the head being information and science, the heart being our compassion, our values, our relationships, and the hands being, let's take these ideas and make them tangible into tangible reality with actual project implementation. And this is some more details about some of the values: respecting resource limits and creating resilience, promoting inclusivity and social justice. I'm going to leave this here with you just to take a peek at in terms of the pieces on the screen here. And I invite you to take a deeper dive into some of the Transition Town values. I think that they're actually quite applicable to every organization that's trying to work on any kind of change activities in the world. So really, our job here at Transition Salt Spring is to keep our community focused and directly engaged in preparing for the changes brought on by climate change. We're really focused on keeping momentum going and keeping hope alive, even when we're faltering sometimes in our own hope, keeping hope alive in our own hearts. We help each other to keep that hope alive and moving forward. With this understanding that we don't know exactly how to do it, but we believe that we can figure it out through collective action and by living our values and staying focused on the climate action plan. So that's a little bit about the how we do things, and wondering if there's any questions, comments on that piece before we move into our next section on the creation of the climate action plan.
Feel free to come off mute if you have any questions for Doreen. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that everyone is paid the same amount, and so it's not a volunteer organization in the same way as most of ours are. Could you elaborate a little bit further on that?
It's actually a blended model, Nathan, of volunteers and staff. So I would say that they're all equally, we're all together at the same table making decisions together.
Okay. Yeah.
Does that answer? Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a question from Marianne in the chat. How did you move to a funded nonprofit? Where do you get funding from?
It's really blended. You have to be super diverse these days with funding. So it's foundation grants. It's a donor activated program. So individual donors. We have a tiny little bit of government funding, but I would say that that's the smallest share of what we do. We're also, we're very entrepreneurial, thanks primarily to Brian's influence coming in as an entrepreneur that way and seeing community funding for initiatives. So we, for example, when we offer some of our activities and events in the community, we charge for those events. So it's social enterprise, it's grants, and it's individual donors.
Great. Lee, and then Sandra.
Hey, yeah, I was taking notes, and I was wondering if you could talk more about the hand part of the slide where you had your values. You said the heart, the head, and the hand, and I missed the hand. So if you could
The hand
elaborate
is
more on
just the
that.
doing. The hand is the doing, and Brian's going to talk
Okay.
about how we're implementing as if we have time today to be able to do that. Yeah. So the hand is just the doing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sandra.
Thank you so much for all the information you shared. I'm curious about how long you have been existing. That would either encourage or discourage me.
Right, sure. Well, I would say that, so for in reality, Transition Salt Spring has been here for 25 years. But in terms of this phase of our development, it's about 1.5 years old. Like, it's always been a very small, very grassroots organization with like a $20,000 a year budget and one 20-hour per month staff person. And in 1.5 years, we've gone to 5 part-time staff and about a $300,000 a year budget because we just ramped. We ramped up. So I don't know if that's discouraging or encouraging, Sandra, but I do know that there's money out there right now for climate change work, especially at local levels in many ways. So I'd really encourage you to not be discouraged. Yeah.
I think it's really encouraging. It's amazing to see the success you've had in a short amount of time. And that's part of why I want to profile you and share this story. So thank you. So I think that was it for the questions that came in. If you want to move on to the next segment.
Great.
Was there one from Lee? I see Lee's hand raised. Did
Lee already asked.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was from before, I believe.
From before.
There we go.
So I'll invite Ruth Waldeck and Brian Young to join me at this point. They were really at the very beginnings of this. I came in at a later time in the creation of the Climate Action Plan. Can you find Ruth in there? Yeah, okay. So let's begin. We have 3 questions for Ruth and Brian, mostly aimed at trying to help you folks understand some of the things that we learned in the actual creation of our Climate Action Plan here locally. So this is really just some top level learnings and mistakes, things we wish we'd done differently. So Ruth and Brian, welcome, welcome. Nice to see you again since yesterday. So let's ask, in fact, I think I'll just start with you, Ruth. How did things get started on the creation of the Salt Spring Island Climate Action Plan? What were the conditions that led up to this creation?
It's an interesting and an important part of, I think, the story. Back in more than 12 years ago, the government of the time decided that they were going to require tracking of emissions. And so they had a program and they made some funding and also some obligations for municipalities to report on things. And then what happened, of course, is some members of our community stood up to do this, just purely volunteer with help from a local politician. And they did a first version of a report which focused entirely on emissions. And then, with every intention of continuing, funding dried up, government priorities changed. And so the lesson there is, do not count on government. Take advantage of opportunities, but do not rely on them. And so then the group kind of had to change, and they became a working group of Transition Salt Spring. And from there, what happened was a politician who had been involved in the earlier version was running again about 10 years later, and came up to me knowing that I had a background in climate adaptation work regionally, and said, do you think we should update the Climate Action Plan and also add adaptation to this? And I said, absolutely. And he did get elected. And so I'd say that the history of this is really having someone who can back you and help you to get things started, because it's hard without some recognition that you have credibility as a not-for-profit or environmental group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brian, anything to add on that startup?
Just an observation after hearing your introduction. I note at the very beginning, in terms of how we were structured, Ruth, you'll recall that we're very much Robert's rules, and we didn't really want it. And I think, was it you who suggested actually we do a check-in at the beginning, and it was like we'd actually thrown a bomb into the room. So I feel like I feel like things have really shifted in the culture, and we used the Robert's rules to kind of regulate discussion, and it was challenging sometimes. So, but we did a tremendous amount of amazing work thanks to a lot of people who committed a hell of a lot of time together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, absolutely.
And for those, I'll put a link in the chat to our climate action plan momentarily. So, but would love to open up to the second question, Ruth and Brian, for both of you. What are some of the lessons that you learned in the creation of the process that you think others would benefit from? Some of the things that, specifically some of the things that worked really well.
Yeah, Ruth, I mean, it's a discussion, but I feel really proud of our public engagement. We had a kick-ass, pardon my French, person who was really good. Her own company had this web-based software on public engagement, and used it for free with us, basically. And it was an awesome way. And in fact, we got way better numbers than like almost any municipal consultation that you can think of. We got more than 10%. Well, we got 2,000 people at least starting the survey that we did on priorities, and 900 and something completing them in a community of 11,500. And, most of those were adults. So there are a lot of kids in there. And I'm also very proud of the document we did. I remember having a conversation with the ex-CAO of the Islands Trust, which is one of our local governments. And I said, well, what should we do differently? And she said, well, none of us ever read the first plan. So that got me thinking, it's like production values. We got to make this look amazing. So I keep this by my desk all the time. I refer to it, and it helped, that kind of thing helped really build credibility. Those two things, the engagement process really helped activate the community. And that document, although that's not on everyone's coffee table, not like me, it's something that really did catapult us, and we leveraged it throughout the whole process. I'll just stop there. Ruth, what about you?
Well, I agree with you completely that we had that early engagement and having this participation by really a truly impressive proportion of the island, the adults on the island, was foundationally important. But also, I think, if I'm going to add to that, I'd say that we also started from the beginning communicating, recognizing that different people have different ideas of what's important, and they see things different ways. And I noticed that even among the volunteers working with us on the climate action plan, everyone had a slightly different perspective. So something that we did early on was we had engagement. We had Chilliwack musician and rock star Bill Henderson, open a webinar for us to try to get a different crowd, to get attention of a different crowd. We've been working with Fire and Rescue, have a fantastic relationship with them. And so that helps. They speak at our webinars, they refer to us when they go out in the community. The president of the Conservancy, we also have local politicians. We have a super supportive MLA and MP, and I think to foster relationships with individuals like that was really important. And then what happened is they became intrigued by what we were doing, and everyone is continuing to participate. And I did this for 17 years in my life, and what I can tell you is you need to create people, drive in people to want to join you. And so we're seeing that happen because it's exciting and it's visionary. And it's also inclusive. And so, Brian, if you could open the book and show a page with some of our actions, because I think the second most important thing that we did, and in all the years, just one table, I want to show them the check boxes. No, pick a better one. There's only 2 in that one. Okay, pick one with lots. There you go. Okay, so you see there's a box there up on the right. You're staying in the blue bar. It's an action. It's a goal statement for food and agriculture, for water, for transportation. So there's a statement, there's a whole bunch of actions listed, and then there's a table in each page that tells you as an individual, as the provincial government, ministry of whatever, as the Agricultural Alliance, as whatever group you're part, it tells you which of these actions is relevant. And so I have never seen a climate adaptation plan that focused like this on what you do. And we started right away saying everyone has a role. And so those are the two things that I think were the most important.
Great, thanks to you both. I think you captured the real heart of the success in there. So let's maybe move on to what you would have done differently. Looking back at this point, is there things that you wish you'd done differently, or mistakes that we made that you could share with folks so that they don't have to make the same ones?
Yeah, I think one of the things, we had political support, but it's line staff support. I don't think we had. Locally, we have a bit of a problem with both of our local governments. There's a significant amount of ossification, and to be fair to them, most governments are simply not set up to deal with crises. So that's been challenging for sure, notwithstanding the fact that the public support and the political support are really instrumental in moving those machines. I think too, we didn't quite have a ready host. The Climate Action Plan Steering Committee was like a part of Transition Salt Spring, and Transition Salt Spring was running off here. I didn't really know much about them at the time. And then as we started wrapping up, we started thinking, well, what the heck are we going to do? And so basically we entered into discussions with the then board to make that happen. So making sure you have a ready host is kind of handy. I wouldn't say we lost time, because what we did is we actually built a new organization in many respects, but that's just a caution there. There are also a bit of tension. Maybe Ruth, you can speak to the scope and some of the tensions over the scope within the context of the project. I think those are some things that came up, but otherwise it was pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'd say is, this was a tough question, Darlene. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and my short answer is we didn't do anything wrong. Everything that we did was part of the process of bringing ourselves and everyone else along with us. And the tensions that Brian's referring to is, for example, trying to introduce adaptation to some people who really think that if everyone had an EV, it would all be fine, and quit talking about adaptation, because if you talk about it, it means we've failed, right? Everyone's giving up. And so this attitude among sort of our colleagues who are committed and putting in a huge amount of effort into this volunteerism is something you're not always going to agree. And that's just the way it is. And so you move forward and you take the energy and you do what you can, and you learn as you're going, and you never beat yourself up about anything, because that's what happens. And some people left. They felt that they'd made the contribution that they could do, and they left, and that is the right thing for them to do. But they're always welcome to come back, and we continue to include them in our circle. But it's a very hard process. And I think if there's one thing, like, yes, we have a lot of political support, and yet we have no political support. So if there's one thing that I would do differently, it would be start off with a memorandum of understanding with local politicians that says, okay, if you're not going to give us money, which they should, because they're a bunch of very tight people when it comes to giving out money. They're also worried about what people think of them giving not-for-profit money. But at the very least, when it comes to getting data and to having credibility, you get an MOU, and I would say our staff will share data with you. Our staff will attend meetings. We will give time to this. And we didn't do that at the beginning. And so if there is any one thing I can think of, that's what it would be, is get them to sign a commitment of putting some of their man hours and their resources into sharing and making information more accessible to you, so you don't have to spend a couple of years chasing ghosts.
Right. Ruth, I'm going to just ask you quickly about the data piece, because I know throughout the Climate Action Plan, finding specific data that was relevant, not just to Salt Spring, but even just our region, was incredibly difficult. And since then, you've actually undertaken a number of steps to try to ensure that any data that we are finding is actually captured and shareable across the region and to other coastal Douglas fir zones, ecosystems. So could you just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think that what I'm starting to do, what Darlene's getting at, is like the data issue is a massive one. And so what I realize is that everyone's got a little bit of data, but we're not all networked and they're on somebody's computer. And it's hard to get from the government. So if someone managed to get information from the government, which is publicly accessible, but by the way, good luck finding it, then what we need to do is we need to be sharing it. And so creating a network, a regional network, and connecting to the various organizations so that as every individual gets data or figures something technical out, that we're sharing it and making it open source. So this is less sexy and it's hard to get money for. And so I'm working really hard to find some resources to create an open source data portal, which would have some constraints around who could put data up and who could modify data, but just to make things shareable among all the groups like ourselves in our region in this coastal Douglas Fir Zone, which is basically the Salish Sea region and coastal mainland and Vancouver Island. So we could start sharing the data and resources that we have and not putting in all the same effort time and time again that we're seeing happening. And it's hard. That is a hard process. So I'd say there, a university partner, which we've had a very difficult time getting, a university partner would be a huge asset in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something you folks really taught me in all of this was the how regional and how local climate change actually is, right? That we talk about it in these global terms and these big trends and impacts, but that it looks different and it shows up different in each region, and the importance of having regional specific data and information to be able to see the trees that are going to be specifically affected, the types of the growing seasons that will be impacted, the sea level rise that's specific to your area, et cetera. So yeah, thanks so much, Ruth and Brian. I really appreciate all of that. I'm going to open just briefly for questions from folks about the creation of our climate action plan, and then we'll move into what it is that we're doing to implement.
Nice, thanks. Tons of action in the chat. There's like a lot of back and forth. Brian has been really active responding to people.
Great.
Louise had her hand up from earlier. So Louise, I want to call on you and see if you, oh, it just popped up that she was in the waiting room. And so maybe she's having connection issues. Louise, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I missed the last 5-10 minutes, but I just got connected again. We have a storm here and internet is a bit dependent on the weather. So is it for the question period?
Yeah.
All right. So so we are a completely volunteer group. We get about, I think, $5,000 from the municipality Greens Fund to do all our activities. And right now we have our municipality is going to be starting developing its action plan, and 2 members of our committee are on the, we call it commission for action to develop the action plan. And I was just wondering if you had some advice in terms of how we might be able to leverage or convince the municipality to support us with more funding perhaps, or doing something to help us with our different activities that we'll need to do to develop this action plan if we want to really have a good engagement of the community. We have 8,000 people in our community, in our municipality, but it's quite widespread. And so I don't know if you have some advice in terms of how. There are 2 councillors that are the presidents of this commission, and the rest 7 of us are volunteers. So I don't know if you have any advice in terms of how we can leverage.
Find the PhDs, Louise. Ruth,
May I ask?
Yes.
Which municipality are you in?
It's La Pêche, which is in Quebec, north of Ottawa.
Okay, so in that area, I mean, one thing that really did us a lot of good early on was having a conversation with responsible authorities that convinced the local government of the importance of fire and rescue. If fire and flooding are an issue, then talking to your fire department speaking to somebody who's responsible for some of the crises that are approaching around climate change that are not being addressed, and then linking your story, your narrative, to the political powers around that. This is really important because the fire, like that's what we did, our fire and rescue, and the whole island are really concerned about fire. And then you shift the conversation into their political agenda so that they can start to, you teach them how it is relevant for their mandate.
Okay, well, that's good because one of our members is currently talking with the fire chief to develop an emergency plan,
Right.
inclusive emergency plan when something happens like a flood or fire, whatever, or an emergency. So maybe we can ask them to maybe
Put some pressure.
involve them somehow in the action plan.
Yes.
Louise, you also missed when you during the storm outage you had, Ruth's point about the MOU, creating a memorandum of understanding or a deal with your municipality that gives your group a stake in the process. So, you know, I lament the fact that we didn't have a tight enough agreement with our municipalities. So I encourage municipalities to think beyond RFPs, to think beyond getting, you know, Stantec or whatever the heck to do a climate plan for $250,000. We did ours for $25,000 in our community, with leveraging a lot of community sweat. So that's not an excuse to exploit cheap labor. It's an excuse to get your community engaged in a plan and get a really good response with it. So that would be some advice.
Yeah, that's the key piece, I think, from ours, is that that 15 to 25K paid for like support staff to take minutes and things. It wasn't for the experts. Maybe we paid for a little bit of data. Mostly it was all done by volunteers. And that's why I'm serious saying find your PhDs and bring them to the table in this. We have maybe 1 more minute left. Nathan, you had, I think, your hand up before David did. So maybe if we...
I don't know if I can be quick enough, but I'll try. I really like the idea of engaging fire and rescue. That's an excellent suggestion, and one that, as Louise said, we are beginning to work on. There's this dilemma I see. On the one hand, we tied ourselves too closely to the government, which it turned out wanted to stall.
Yeah.
It just would not move forward, and
that's
2
their job.
years passed without much of anything happening on our front. But on the other hand, I'm also in Halifax some of the time, and here the problem is that these big plans of government even appear that we've had input into, but because they're actually not in the bylaws, they keep getting overridden now by the new Conservative government, which wants to push growth and property development. So you really have to buy in, and yet if you do, you get stalled.
Yeah.
So if I may comment on that, Nathan, I did a project in Cape Breton Island. We did basically a climate impact assessment, and it was we focused around the Bredor Lakes because that was what was really important to the various municipalities. And what I can tell you from that experience, first, if you go onto the International Institute for Sustainable Development website, you can find a copy of that report. Just type in Bredor Lake, the name is Bizakova. I'll type it in the box here. But what I want to say about that is don't give up, because what you need to do is have a conversation with your planners, because it was when we brought the planners. So this was a 1.5-year process that we worked with universities, Cape Breton University, government agencies, locals, Mi'kmaq. And what we found was, what I found, when we brought in the planners, who were fed up with all the bloody blah political speak, and we said, this is the problem. They said, yeah, well, we've already got the tools to deal with that. And it blew my mind, because they knew what to do using existing tools and how to leverage them. And the municipality that had Sydney in it had better resources, stepped up to take the role for the rest of the poorer neighbors around the lake. So I'd say have a conversation with planners, and they will tell you how to leverage the existing tools and priorities of government.
Yeah, thank you very much. We're just starting that process. I think it will work.
So we're down to the wire now, folks, and have a key piece that we'd love to share with you. So please, Brian, take it away. You have about 5 minutes to be able to take us to
Sure.
the.
Yeah, this is fun, guys. We haven't had a chance to actually talk with a broader audience about what we're doing. It's we're always in our foxholes, so excuse the military analogy, it feels like it sometimes. I keep the climate action plan by my desk. I also keep this by my desk. And it's a leaflet that came out from a group that's really active on the island and who, you know, are saying some good things, but they're also backed by some really rich landowners from Vancouver and are highly divisive in their approach. So I think that's one of the things we did to implement what we're doing is to talk across divides. And it's a thread that weaves through increasingly everything we do. So we're having, you know, conversations with people who have in the past called us eco-fascists. And, you know, some of these folks are trades on the island who are feeling really threatened by, you know, a highly privileged segment of the climate movement that wants everything all nice, but he doesn't really think much about the jobs part of it or the housing part of it. So climate justice really comes into it. So how we started, we really needed to get the ship off the ground or into the air, as it were. And so we launched a program called the Climate Action Coach Program, which was a high public touch program about what you can do in your home. And, you know, I roll my eyes a little bit at that. It's what I did in Ontario for 20 years, and it's super powerful. But in BC, we've got hydroelectric, and the carbon emissions from homes really represents a very small part of the wedge. So it's a way to get people in the door, and I like to think of it as our Trojan horse. So the other project, of course, is the one that Ruth's been working literally day and night on, hopefully not nights in the woods, Ruth, but on a watershed, a critical watershed in partnership with the Waterworks District. So that's so awesome. And plus you have the Conservancy involved. So you have these three differing agendas that are coming together, overlapping to try and do something about our vulnerable watersheds from a climate resilience point of view, from a water quality point of view, and from an ecological preservation and actually restoration point of view. We're also, we have a relationship with 3 local First Nations represented by the Wasatch Leadership Council on the Saanich Peninsula through a project that we're shopping around right now and waiting for a response on funding for, called Quanidal, which means learning together. And I've learned a heck of a lot working with the folks at the WLC and about how to engage First Nations. It's challenging, and for reasons that are totally understandable. They're under-resourced. So we've got an awesome proposal that braids together Western scientific knowledge and traditional Indigenous knowledge to basically go after propagating Indigenous ways of knowing into the larger community, reclaiming that while sequestering carbon. And that's hopefully will be in concert with all of the conservancies that are all over the islands, because they've got all these basically antiquated covenant structures. We're also doing an awesome climate action arts festival called On the Rise in the Fall. That's another way to engage people in it through another lens, through the performing arts. And we're really looking forward to that. We just hired someone to develop a climate action report card. This is the kind of tool, advocacy tool we need to make our politicians accountable. So-and-so, you said you would do this and you did not, you got a C-. So what's with that? And we can report publicly on that. And, you know, I'm, maybe a bit shrewd politically, but, you know, if they don't play ball, we will make sure you're not elected, kind of thing. That's kind of how we approach it. And it's we say it very friendly, but this is a very important agenda. So, so I think we've also built our reputation as conveners on the island. So we don't know everything, but we're starting to bring disparate parties together to create, you know, climate action babies, essentially. And so it's really exciting, the number of initiatives. And Darlene and I were reflecting yesterday how it's really changed. The tone has changed in this community around adversarialness. There's a tagline that I can't stand for this island. It's called an argument surrounded by water. But go back to our mission, which is basically part of it is reimagining community together. Basically, that should be first, because I think in many respects, we won't take climate action. We will not be able to take climate action if we don't get our relationships right. And that's something that I've become increasingly cognizant of in this challenging time. So I think that's all I wanted to say.
So Laura, I think that's it for us in terms of the time, and but thanks so much for the chance to share.
You were on fire. Thank you. There's so much in the chat too. Thanks for sharing it. It's such an inspirational story. I hope this continues, this conversation. If people do have additional questions, can they reach out to you folks?
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I saw someone had put their email in the chat already earlier, but if you're able to share your contact info, that'd be really much appreciated. There's a lot of excitement here, and I'm seeing a lot around the data too, back and forth around that open data portal, and some examples Lee shared. They're doing some work on that in New Brunswick, and Johan in London, so some cool synergies there. So we are moving now into the peer input process. So instead of a breakout room conversation with a big group, we thought it'd be fun to do groups of 3 today. And oops, it's not the right slide. And try this out. So peer input process, don't worry if you haven't done it before. It's just a quick way to get feedback from your peers on an issue, challenge, question you're grappling with. And so we'll do 3 mini rounds, 10 minutes each. And each, you can decide, anyone can go first. Just share that question you're holding, what you'd like input from your peers on, and a little bit about your project to give this some background. That's just a couple minutes, then a couple minutes of clarifying and probing questions from your 2 peers on the call. And then the first person who's shared actually doesn't speak, and the discussion happens between the other 2. And that person, you just have to try to just listen and be in deep listening mode while the others discuss ideas that they may have around that question, and offering feedback and advice. And then we'll go into round 2, round 3. So I'm going to be putting broadcasting messages into the rooms to say, like, move on to the next speaker, move on to this. And so you'll have that to guide you. And then we'll come back as a group and close and just share some quick reflections. So yeah, Jamie, if you're able to open the rooms, we will get that started. Welcome back, everyone. Any reflections on how that went? I know it wasn't a lot of time and we powered through, but how did it feel for you?
If I can chip in, Laura, I thought that was an incredibly powerful session. This idea of these peer breakout rooms, I think, is a wonderful step forward. Great learning experience.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Cool. Astrid.
Yeah, I would say as well, it's really fun meeting other people and like just chatting more like one-on-one. So yeah, thumbs up, thumbs up.
And Jay, I saw a thumbs up from, and Andrea. Sandra, how about you?
Yeah, that was great. There was only one other person in the group until a wonderful young woman from British Columbia joined us. And it was a great opportunity to discuss. I feel I have to apologize that we didn't necessarily at all follow the prompts, but we did have productive conversations that I think were beneficial to both of us.
Well, that's all that matters. That's great. Who is?
Are you looking at me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Helly. Hi. So sorry I didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm new to this group. My name's Yaheli Klein. So there you see my Y Klein. I am a policy analyst with the Climate Action Secretariat, Province of BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. So I'm here, still trying to figure out my role and how to participate and contribute to the group. Really keen to hear what kind of resources and information we can share to help the group. So one thing that Sandra said would be helpful would be to hear like success stories and what are the factors that have contributed to some local governments really moving ahead and being leaders in the climate action world. And then also really interested to learn about things, and I know this is very vague, but that potentially as a province we can scale up. So that's why I'm here.
Amazing. Oh, thanks. Thanks for introducing yourself. It's great. Yeah. Cool. And I'm seeing some more comments in the chat here from Marianne and Sydney, Ruth, Sandy, Lee, Andrea, that people really enjoyed this. So awesome. I'm so glad. I thought everyone was going to complain it wasn't enough time, and I know that's probably also true, but because it was quick, but I'm glad that you had productive conversations. And so we'll try that. We'll do that again for sure. Let me just share my screen really quickly as we have just a couple minutes left. So I wanted to say, well, the next meeting is, as always, second Tuesday of the month, so August 9th. And the topic's going to be evaluating impact with our consulting director at Tamarack, who specializes in evaluation, specifically participatory evaluation methods. So that is August 9th. As always, hopefully your team's going to meet between now and then. There will be a homework assignment for next month, a worksheet to fill that you can do with your team, and that's going to be shared really soon. And just a final thing, I want to thank you all for the feedback you've provided thus far, for both in terms of the cohort session, how it's going so far, given that we're at the halfway mark, and also on the November gathering we're planning. A few things people shared about the cohort process, loving the guest speakers, the coaching, the resources being shared, and hearing other stories. There was a desire to go into more detail on the how, and I hope today helped with that, kind of hearing from other communities and how they've done it, and kind of trying to, with the speakers, trying to maybe cover a little bit less and dive deeper. For the group sessions, matching with other people at similar stages of planning implementation. Having a facilitator in the group breakouts when there's a bigger group might be helpful. Making the homework mandatory. We kind of heard like, let's really ensure that we get this done, and the readings too. And we heard a couple of people say, could the sessions be a bit longer, because we would have more time to go into discussion and the breakouts. So, and finding other ways to connect outside the sessions. So really great feedback, appreciate it. And we will share the links. I don't have them on hand. Apologies, but I will, in the follow-up email, we'll share those links once again. So it's not too late to please give your feedback. And thank you everyone who offered to support with planning our big November gathering. We'll be following up separately really soon. And we'll have a couple of ways to do that, whether it's just providing feedback on a document or joining a meeting where we can talk about it. So thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of summer. See you in August.
Thank you so much.